Hi there, this is Ken with MinnoTank, and I have Dema Poppa, the CEO of Invio. We're going to take a deep dive into the current situation in their raise and their round, and this is a video referencing after you've watched the deck pitch, so please make sure on MinnoTank you do watch the deck pitch before this. We're referencing statistics and information from that video. So Dema, thank you very much for joining us on MinnoTank.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, Dema, so we're going to go into three major components of your pitch and the current raise. So number one is going to be, what's your why? I know there's a lot of big, beautiful brains behind what you're doing, a lot of experience, decades of experience behind what you're doing. So your why is number one. Number two is going to be your traction. So where are you currently at? You know, talking about revenue and customers and expansion and growth and how fast and how long and all the good nitty gritty analytics and data for me. And number three is your raise. So we want to hear where you're currently at with your raise. And we know this information is always going to be out of date, but we just want to hear where you're at, for someone who's looking at possibly investing into something like Invio. So without any further ado, let's talk about your why. So Dema, I believe you probably hate paper. Is that a factual statement?
We've had our differences for sure. So yeah, it's been, I would say, a necessary evil for a long time in the space, but I think was a necessary evil is the key word, because Invio is working very hard to change that.
So talk to me about how you rally your team and what is the inspiration behind Invio. What was the moment that you said, what's your why? Why did you have to do this instead of, keeping a cushy job at medical trial work for the rest of your life?
Yeah. Well, I was in that world for a long time and dealing with a 40 hospital study. And during the planning phases, FDA actually issued some new guidance that said, hey, we understand that people expect you, or people think that we expect you to go to every single site to look at 100% of the records every 4 to 8 weeks, but we never said that. So, it was an interesting place where industry expectations were thrown a curveball by our regulator, which isn't something that happens a lot. But, I was in a position where we're planning this large study and we really wanted to capitalize on that opportunity because paper is so painful. Now, it turns out that just because the opportunity exists doesn't mean you can capitalize on it, because oftentimes there's lack of tools. And that was the situation that we found ourselves in. So we were getting a lot of hate from our research sites when we were asking them to send us certified copy scans of printed electronic health records. We got kind of a grassroots rebellion going on. And so we dialed back on that and started doing a little bit more work with site visits and spending time actually in the air flying to look at printed records. Crazy, because the data that they were collecting was transferred to us in an electronic system, but we still had to go on site to verify that data. So, for all the cool innovation that we did at that study, this was the one problem that we couldn't solve, and it was incredibly frustrating. So I got together with Cassie, a longtime colleague of mine, and was basically complaining about the problem. And she said, there's this thing called the internet, right? And so that was the spark that started Invio.
That's so fantastic. And it's so funny whenever you hear about, the age-old technology conversation is what industry is safe from tech, right? And we know that healthcare, there are so many companies going after the healthcare space. And you mentioned your deck pitch that you yourself obviously have competition out there, but it's such a painful, that is extremely expensive. I can only imagine the amount of flights and time and money and expense. And, even in your video, you have 1,000 square feet of paper visible. It just seems incomprehensible that this has not been brought online, and I'm grateful that Invio exists, because I'd love to have better medicine for me. So it's an awesome why, especially after spending 10 years yourself in the industry, really getting knee deep and understanding it, not just being someone fresh out of college who says, I think this is a big problem, but saying, I've seen it for 10 years, I've been there, I've done the work on both sides, and I want to fix this. So awesome. So then Dema, talk to me about your traction. So where is Invio at? And give me some awesome KPIs, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about awesome KPIs, but I will say, so where we are is we're pretty early in commercialization. A real disadvantage that we have in this space as a startup is that, there's no such thing as an MVP that's easily accessible, right? You're either compliant or you're not. And so to even get to a place where we could support any medical research, we had to have our HIPAA compliance in place. We had to have our FDA regulatory compliance in place. And that took a lot of engineering. So it took us about 1.5 years to get to a place where we had, kind of an MVP, as people consider it, which was, basically September of this past year. Now, that said, we had done a preliminary pilot with a contract research organization before that. So we worked with them on an 11-center study and showed great results in cutting out about half of the travel that study would have done and eliminating a majority of the paper. If you're looking for KPIs, that's fascinating to me because we saw about 11,000 pages of documents in what, in the grand scheme of things, is a very tiny study. So for me, that was a really stark reminder, again, of the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. Following on that, we went into the Cedars-Sinai Accelerator powered by Techstars. Very fantastic program. We went into it to get closer to one of the sort of premier research institutions in the world. And in fact, immediately after the accelerator, launched into a series of pilots with them. So we've done about 9 clinical trials. We've had tremendous success with them in terms of the pilots and are now moving towards a much broader rollout across their system, their affiliates, and everybody they work with to do research.
Fantastic. So if you were to try to put a price tag on that, just because we know we have a lot of the MinnoTank audience is investor-based. So if I'm trying to say, okay, great, you have a big player that's going to use this, accomplishing that relationship, what kind of price tag, what kind of revenue would that generate? And because I remember watching from your tech pitch, a lot of what you said is when you get one client, there's a lot of revenue potential from a single client. It's all license-based and it's SaaS-based. So just give me one example, give me a bait of like, well, just one company, what can we look at from a revenue side?
Yeah. So I think if you look across the market, for an average healthcare institution, Cedars-Sinai is big, frankly, but there are, if you figure that the average research site has about 200 studies they're doing, we'd be looking at, 250 to 300K annual recurring revenue anticipated, and quite a bit more for larger research sites. So, I think on the higher end, we'd see deals approximating, 600K a year on that side of the market. And the good news there is that we actually see that as the smaller side of the market. The value proposition is a little bit smaller for research sites because they're not dealing as directly with travel. So I think on the sponsor and the CRO side, the value prop is significantly greater, and we'd be looking at an average contract value of about 76 to 100K per year for a single trial. And given that there's about 13,000 industry-sponsored trials active today in the US, that's a pretty big revenue opportunity that exists with that.
That is pretty big. That's awesome. All right, so great. So just to wrap up this conversation, let's talk about your raise. So Dema, what are you currently raising and how much do you guys already have committed to your round?
Yeah, so we're raising 700K on a convertible note. The round is half either soft circled or wired. So we've made excellent progress from that standpoint. And that's, we're continuing to raise. So that's why we're here.
Fantastic. And so if you have an investor who happens to be watching who's very interested in this, what are you looking for from investors? Is it simply capital? Is it strategic partnership? Is it connections? What does your perfect investor look like? And how can they help your business?
Yeah. So I think the perfect investor would be somebody who has an understanding at least of healthcare, if not clinical trials. Now, given that it's a relatively specialized area, I think that's a little bit harder to find. But to be honest, we've had good luck finding angels who actually are themselves clinical researchers. And so, that sort of dovetails with a lot of, physicians tend to be able to invest. And so, if we have physicians who are running clinical trials, they may directly interact with this problem. And so I think that we've had great success with physician investors previously. And so I think that there's real opportunity there, as well as with people who have interacted with drug companies or work with clinical trials. So, smart money is always better than capital, but capital will help us achieve our goals too. So,
sure. Perfect. And I mean, it shouldn't be too hard if you look at different angel groups. There are a lot of different medical professionals who come together to do co-investment. So I'm really hoping that Invio can tap into some of those experiences. There's many across the board. The Angel Capital Association is a great resource you might want to tap into. So I have some personal connections there, and I'll get you that after the pitch. So Dema, thank you very much for that deep dive conversation. Dema Poppa, the CEO of Invio, thank you very much for joining us on MinnoTank.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. It's been fun.
All right. God.